Hashtag sorry, not sorry, but welcome back to season 3. Yeah, with a dwellers below, dwellers below.
G'day, this is the Dwellers Below, the podcast, the Australian podcast that speaks about the UK tournament scene. I'm Nick, the father of lies. Joining me today, David War. How's it hanging?
Yeah, good. Excited for rolling dice and avoiding combat.
The best kind of Warhammer. And Chris Cousins, the egg.
Yeah, also excited to roll dice and fight one combat per game in turn 6 when you can't get charged in return.
You two are everything I love about Warhammer players. I'm going to live vicariously through you guys this week, and probably much like I have in the last few episodes, because I haven't had a lot of hobby going on in my life. Been a little bit under the weather recently, and not really had the time. But you guys have been playing games, and we sort of spoke about last episode about sort of the last 6 months, and we were keen to sort of see what the next 6 months holds and get cracking into some events and play some more games. And I've got an event that I'm hopefully going to play in October, which I'll speak to later. But I understand you guys have been playing some events, Chris.
Yep, I managed to get a one-day event in Dunfermline on the weekend. Cry Havoc, run by the Dwarf Wargaming Club, and Dave and I both went down all the way down south to ye old Nottingham for one of the Square-based events that Rob Symes runs from the Square-based podcast.
Yeah, now this is what I want to talk about, because this is a 2-day event, right?
Yep, 5 games, 2 days, lovely dinner in the evening, great times and classic hits.
First 2-dayer for both of us, I think, Chris.
Yeah, there's not been one in Scotland yet that I know of, although there is one in a couple of weeks, so I need to get on to buying my ticket for that one. But yeah, otherwise I've only been doing 1 days thus far.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about it last episode, but I don't think I've played a 2-dayer in years. Probably CanCon, not this year, the year before. So that's pushing 18, 20 months ago. So
That's a lot longer than that for me. I mean, it would have been when I was in Melbourne for sure. So 7 years ago, something like that, the last 2-dayer I played.
Yeah, I hadn't played a 2-dayer since, a couple of months before that one in some Lord of the Rings. But yeah, I think there's a pretty hefty correlation between having like adult responsibilities and children and getting a full weekend off to play a 2-day event.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we were pretty down on the 2-dayers in the last episode, but maybe Chris, can you talk to us about, like, what do you get from a 2-dayer that goes above and beyond a 1 day? Like, why should the people playing these 1-dayers who might struggle for family time make the effort for a 2-day? Because 2-days, as we sort of again last episode spoke about, 2-days used to be all we ever played. Like, the 1-dayer was the rarity, the 2-dayer was the baseline, and they were great. And I love a 2-day event. So let's, rather than talking straight to the event itself, let's maybe discuss, like, what do we get out of a 2-dayer above and beyond a 1-dayer?
For me, it's everything around the tournament that the 2-dayer kind of adds. So you have, or at least for me, that's usually going to be travel time, ideally road tripping with some friends, staying somewhere together, talking Warhammer all weekend, or in Dave and I stayed with Dave for this one and talked about things other than Warhammer at some points in time, which I'm sure was appreciated by non-Warhammering members of the household. And also getting to hang out with the people that you're meeting and your opponents, not just between rounds, but going out for dinner, much bigger chunk of conversation. There's just a bigger social element, I think, of the 2-day events, and that's what I really like about them still, even though the time is increasingly an issue. And added to that is ideally they're not too close to where I live, because for some reason doing a 2-day event and coming home afterwards each day doesn't quite hit the same spot. I don't know how you feel about that, Dave.
I actually don't mind either way. It's probably harder for me to get a 2-day where I'm not coming home and can at least give Bree half an hour to have like a shower without a baby in the room with her beforehand. But the 2 days the social stuff is amazing. Like going out for dinner afterwards and hanging out with people. I think less these days for me going out for a big night on the Saturday night, but having approximately 1 to 3 beers and a meal and chatting Warhammer with people, pretty glorious. And you get much more of that like cohort feel than you do in a 1-dayer. But yeah, it also competitively is a better measure of players if you've got more than like, what is it, 12 players or something is the max that you can get out of 3 games.
I think
Eight,
eight
I
players
think,
is right for 3.
Yeah, so you get a much more accurate true winner.
Yeah, I mean, 5 rounds gets you up to the 32 player threat card.
So that from the purely competitive side is good. But again, the as you know, the vibes are just immaculate in a 2-dayer where people are hanging out for the whole time, especially somewhere like Rob's venue, which is really set up for you doing that and less being in a 40-degree tin shed in the middle of Australia's worst city.
Yeah, because a 1-dayer can feel a bit rushed, right? Like you're generally incentivized in a 1-dayer. You're going to drive up in the morning or arrive in the morning. You're going to play your 3 games. You're probably like having a pretty short lunch break, and then you finish up at 6 p.m. and then you're probably straight home. Like that's it, right?
Well, yeah, 1-dayer I'm back for dinner and helping with my kids put down, and for a 2-dayer, this makes it much harder to do. But it is like I'm pretty much out of action this weekend. You know, like I'm not going to be useful to you, so you do get to devote that time a bit better.
And then you can try back on other weekends.
Yeah, and that social part of it is really the best bit, isn't it? Like, as much as we play Warhammer and because we like Warhammer, it's the stuff around it and the interaction during the games, and the social stuff is just more of that interaction without the Warhammer getting in the way, right?
Yeah, that's what makes tabletop Warhammer different to playing Warhammer Total War, for example, is like being in a room with people.
Completely.
And I know the Square Based show had a big chat about small events against large events. I know Rob was really advocating for smaller events being the most important ones, which I kind of agree. Small events where you have, 15, 20 local players coming semi-regularly seems really important for building a community. And what I hope we then do is we start to get a few of those big tentpole events where those communities actually get to come together. And that's the sort of ecosystem that, at least in Australia, Tournament Warhammer used to have, and that I think got us all so hooked into it, was having events to hang out, but then having those bigger events to plan for, to go to catch up with friends you only see a couple of times a year in person.
It's also, I think, different depending on who you are. Like if you're going to a small event as a single person, you've never been to a tournament before, 24 players, you are definitely going to walk out of that weekend with some new friends because it's an intimate crowd. You'll hang out, you'll meet friends. If you're going to a 100-person event, actually you could get lost in the crowd and not make as many connections. But I would argue more fun if you're going with a group of friends, people already in the scene like that. What we used to have is the CanCon experience of the road trip where everyone goes. Really good if you did know people, but possibly a little bit more intimidating if you don't have those connections beforehand.
Yeah, an example.
Go on.
Just going to say an example of that from a Magic the Gathering tournament I went to. There was a big, like a chunk of Australians, like 9 or 10 of us, and we all had been in contact before the event. But once we were there, someone just sat at our table because they needed a seat during one of the morning meetings and just kind of got adopted into the group. And so for the rest of the weekend, we were catching up and hanging out with him just as much as everyone else. And yeah, I think that's where having like the core group that you go to a big event with can be really helpful, and having small events in a community around you beforehand is just such a good way to start developing that.
Absolutely. And like, I love the stories from like weekends where you go out with your group and you go up to an event, and then you sort of add someone new to the group, or you add a few new people to your friend group, because somehow they've just become intermingled. They've come along for the ride, and it turns out they're an absolute like baller of a person, and suddenly like they're one of your best mates, or it feels like that anyway. And yeah, I think that's the thing you miss from the one dayers, is that extra social element. And thinking back, like all of my, like, I've got some amazing memories of Warhammer being played on the tabletop, but by far my memories from Warhammer are from the 2-day events where things got a bit out of control on Saturday night, and you just have these just massive days, right?
It's karaoke, it's Ben Leopold at a dive bar, it's Brad getting too angry. Like it's all of that. Like it is those stuff around it that's the most fun. And I think
it's even just
especially
the small
the road
stuff
trip
too. It's like I have an enduring memory of just chowing down on leftover pizza with Chris in
Cardiff.
In Cardiff, yeah, like at probably 4 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
We just staggered back into his room in Cardiff and just started chowing down on the pizza that we'd been eating for dinner. And I don't know why that's in my brain, but it's still there.
My partner, who was staying there as well for that weekend, also has an enduring memory of us coming home at 4 a.m. and sending really drunken WhatsApp messages to the rest of the dwellers.
It's her first experience of the Foster's King.
Yeah.
Oh god.
I mean, that's not to say that every 2-day Warhammer event is a drunken mess, because you can certainly, like, there's people in our friends group that don't drink, and there's we've had plenty of good sort of weekends where they're a bit more chill and a bit more low key, and we've just had dinner afterwards, and you don't have to have an absolute bender every time.
Well, for long time listeners,
I certainly encourage anyone who go on.
Yeah, I think we've discovered there's a bit of a delay. For long-time listeners, the old Nick Gentili strength 2.5 joke didn't come out of a drunken night out. That was just a chill Sunday after event meal at TGI Fridays, where he decided that he was in fact stronger than the average human, and discovered that he was in fact not. So, like, yeah, definitely not needing to be a drunken event.
I mean, you say that, but I also remember I also remember a drunken night out running around Sydney asking waitresses what strength they would rate Nick Gentili out of 10 to verify.
Gentili probably wouldn't have been drinking, right? Because he'd go out, but he normally wouldn't drink. Or he'd have, one pretentious cocktail and call himself a day.
So, I mean, I didn't drink till I'm at the dwellers, and here I am now.
Yeah, the corrupting influence. I think
it's all your fault.
I take no responsibility. I think the 2 days, I do miss them and would love to play more in them. I think they are a big call, though, and so having a big event to plan 6 months ahead for, it would be a really nice thing. But I'm probably going to be playing more one days for a while.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's as we said last time. That's people's life circumstances now are more conducive to 1-day events, just to get the games in. But the occasional 2-day, if you're hesitant, if you've only played 1 day, is definitely get along to a 2-day. They're an awesome time.
Should we talk about?
Well, let's talk about Rob's event, the Square Bust GT, I think it was called.
The War for the Trollhide Trousers.
Oh, there you go. Very fancy. Talk us through, like, before we go into the games, talk us through the structure and the setup. Now, I've heard things about the Square Bust venue, Rob's venue. Talk us through it.
So, Rob's got a venue that was, from what I understand, previously a bit of a wreck, and has basically renovated it to be a specific wargame event location. So it's over 2 floors. He's got his tables for 26 players or whatever, and it's not a game store. It's just a event location. So you pay your entry fee, and then for the weekend, it's whatever drinks you'd like. If you want tea, coffee, beer, cider, soft drink, whatever, you go for it. He's got 4 tables that can stream games. He's got seats at every table that are proper computer chairs, and so you're not standing for 12 hours. The terrain is immaculate, 3D printed, really beautifully painted. Tables, no paper printout, forests, hills, and buildings this time. And it's a pretty well-oiled machine, wouldn't you say, Chris?
Yeah, there's just some really nice touches. Like the forests have a template underneath them. So for units moving into the forest, you can just pick it up, move the unit in, and put the forest back down afterwards. Just little things that make quality of life for when you're playing games so much better. Rob could have laid out the tables a bit differently and maybe squeezed another 1 or 2 in, but instead of trying to maximize number of people, he's tried to maximize the quality of experience, and I think done a really good job of that.
So you have lips around the table where you can put cards and gubbins. You have little drawers at the bottom of the table you can put your book in under it. Like, just lots of really smart design choices that reflect that it was designed for you to play tournaments.
That sounds sick.
And it's like the opposite approach to some of the other purpose-built gaming venues, which are more going for that big hall, large numbers, able to put on a few big events a year. And Rob's, I think, really smartly gone the other way, especially in Nottingham, where there's like Warhammer World round the corner, which is to say we're going to have smaller events, but more of them. And he's just built exactly the right venue for that.
So yeah,
that sounds really good. That's the kind of a venue that you really want to play in, right? Like, as you say, events like CanCon and convention events are really great. They can be an amazing weekend, but the trade-off is you are generally in a humongous venue that isn't purposely there just for you. Like, you're sharing it with other people, and depending on where you are, it can be very hot or very cold and a lot less comfortable. So yeah, that sounds like a really cool venue.
Although, without trying to be too effusive, a point of constructive criticism, it did get a bit warm for one of my games until Rob came past and turned on the fan that was next to us the entire time, and we had just entirely not realized was there. So yeah, maybe some better signage to say that this fan does in fact work might help some of the really some of the less observant players like myself.
But yeah, it was great setup.
Hashtag not sponsored.
But you should get down to it. It's a really lovely vibe. But I think people are very, like, there's a crew that clearly go there a bunch, like turn up to tournaments all the time and know each other. So it's very like kind of friendly and inviting space. So I think people should give it a shot. If you're within a few hours of Nottingham, you'll have an awesome time.
Nice. So Chris, did you come up morning of or evening before?
Got the bus down the evening before, actually, and had a lovely barbecue at Dave's place, and got to catch up with Dave and Bree and talk Australia. Always good fun. And then we went across from there both days. It's not a huge train ride from there to Nottingham, but I just had a very chill approach to it, and then a less chill midnight bus home afterwards, because the UK it's got many downsides, but one advantage it does have is overnight buses that Australia doesn't really do.
Yeah, and the exchange of that is that the trains cost £100 and don't work.
I mean, at least you have trains.
Sure, yeah.
The train from Melbourne to Sydney takes 14, 15 hours, and probably costs not a lot less than that.
No, that's fair.
And for reference, it's a freight train. Like, it's not like a passenger train. It's basically a freight train. All right. So morning of the event. Take us through it, Dave.
So we train down. I'm rocking my Avoidance Wood Elves, Dragon, level 4, Treatment Ancient, 7 units of Archers and Deepwood Scouts, 3 units of Sisters of the Thorn, an Eagle, and a Tree Man. So it's like full. I don't want to play a game of Warhammer with you. I just want to take your models off. And rocked up. Game 1. What am I up against? A Star Dragon with a level 4 on Illusion to stop you from getting into combat with it. 2 Lothan Skycutters, 2 units of Silver Helms, and then a couple of units of Swordmasters. This is up against Mikhail, who you played against well, Chris, in the last round.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so rocked into that game. Really interesting matchup because Mikhail actually has enough speed to get to me with a Dragon, 2 Skycutters, and 2 Silver Helms. He can kind of push everything up the board pretty fast. But this was my first play with the list. I've not done any practice games just because I don't want to subject any of my local players to what that list does to you when it works. And so turns out it did work and pretty much shot everything off before charging his Star Dragon with my Dragon on the last turn, and a couple of units of Sisters of Thorn to get some static combat res, and got an 18-2 out of that. So it was an interesting matchup, but I think in the end the Wood Elf shooting was enough to take off all his fast stuff, and that was the first stress test of can I fight a Star Dragon? Yes, I can.
Nice. And so 18-2 win. What was the scoring system for the event?
So it's really interesting. Rob does victory, like win, loss, draw is the main determinant. So it's not actually battle points is the thing that makes you win the event primarily. It's do you win all your games. Then it's a fairly standard, like 150 point swing. Is that right, Chris?
I think it ballooned out a bit more than that because you needed more than 1,500 points for a 20-0
to get a max.
But,
yeah, right.
A pretty familiar margin of victory points table.
Yeah. So to get yourself out of the draw and into a win, how much did you have to win by?
200, I think, right, Chris?
Might have been 150.
Maybe 150.
I'm just trying to remember narrow. What our game was. Spoilers, we played.
It's pretty narrow, but you do surprisingly see quite a lot of draws. I think I don't know, maybe a third of the field, more than that, had a draw at some point. But yeah, it's pretty tight for victories. But yeah, I mean with that one, I'd clearly gotten a win and wouldn't have lost the win by losing my Dragon. But if I got the Dragon off him, it took it from basically being pretty close to a draw to a big win at the end. Yeah. So decided to take the stab. So it's 100-point differential. Actually, I've just gone and checked it. It's 100-point, and then for draws, and then 200 step ups each step up till 1900 is 20.
So what are the battle points get you if it's win, loss, draw? What's the benefit of winning big versus winning little?
Literally, if someone is on the same number of wins as you at the end of the game.
That's your tiebreaker. Okay.
Yeah.
The downside is you get matched on battle points, not purely on win-loss draw. So
you might have a huge winning margin, but that might actually make it more difficult to get the 5-0 because you're playing against other people with huge winning margins.
Yeah. So you could actually have
thread the needle and just aim for 12s.
Yeah, you might be better off, but you are playing people who've won the same number of games as you, but you will get sorted into that. Yeah.
All right. Take us through the rest of that day for you.
So my second game was against Liam Jordan. Really lovely army. Lots of awesome 3D printed trolls for a troll horde army. He is running a massive block of like 8th edition 20 Savage Orc with a level 4 in the unit using battle magic, 2 troll hags, 2 goblin big bosses, a couple of wolf rider units, and then just mountains of trolls. So this is a really good army, and it's a really bad army against me because we're playing Battle for the Pass, and he has a bunch of trolls sideways across the board against my army that spits out 4 pillars of flame a turn, plus fireballs, a million shooting shots, and it has a dragon that he doesn't have really good responses to. So Liam, beautiful army, really friendly guy, had an awful time and got 20 by me pretty robustly, pretty quickly, actually.
Yeah, I mean, what does he even do against that? Like, he's not that quick. He's just kind of slow march across the middle of the board and hope.
So we had a chat about it. He had two options. One was he corners. He just puts his whole army in the back corner of his table and accepts a small loss. I'll get to him at some point and I'll get some points off him, but I won't get big points off him because if he's in the corner, I probably can't chuck my dragon into his whole army to countercharge. But I win it. Archers have 32 inches range. I've got scouting stuff. I'm movement 8, I think, on the Sisters of the Thorn. So I'm going to get him, right? But he decided instead, let's have a game, and tried to push everything at me. Arcane Urgency on trolls, shove things really fast, and basically just deploy as wide as possible so I have nowhere to get around him. So he's just moving forward 12 inches at a go, which I think was the pathway where he had a possible way to win, but not a high likelihood of winning. The downside of that is his whole army is lined up for pillars of flame to bounce through 3 or 4 units at a time each turn.
But I think that's an advantage of the approach that Rob uses, right? Where you have win-loss draw as the primary way of ranking people, is that gives Liam an incentive to have a crack for the unlikely win, with the downside not being that big. Like, lose big, lose small, it's still a loss. And so,
because it's a 24 or 26 player event, so you're only going to have one person on 5-0 at the end of the event.
And I think for most of Rob's events, you haven't had someone on 5-0 because people have drawn.
Yeah.
So it was a tough one for Liam, to be honest. I think that's not the army he wants to see across the table for him. Doesn't have enough Swift Stride, doesn't have enough durability, and I've got too many.
Swift Stride is so important.
Yeah, especially when I can then place a second forest in addition to the existing forest on my side. So about half of the table is covered by difficult terrain. So if you want to charge me, you're charging me at movement 5, rolling 2 dice and choosing the lowest of the 2.
Yeah, okay, that's bad.
So you're not getting into combat with me if you're more than like 8 inches away from me at any given time. And because I'm moving backwards at least 3 inches a turn with everything in my army.
Joy.
And shoving a dragon at you. It's a bad one.
Was your third game any more interactive?
Look, third one was a tough one. So I was playing Tom Carley, who's got a really good Chaos Dwarf list. I think this is an awesome list. Both visually looks great, really well converted up and done, but also quite strong. He's got a Black Orc War Boss on a Wyvern with all the stuff you want him to have. He's got a Sorcerer Prophet on a Bale Taurus with Armor of Meteoric Iron, 4-up ward save, Mantle of Stone, so it makes him toughness 7. So he's got like a 5-up that you can't modify, another 5-up, toughness 7, flies, runs at you with Demonology, and does terrible things. Black Orcs that he can give Steed Shadows to make them march 24 inches into your army on turn 1. A massive unit of 40 Cutthroats because they only cost 134 points for 40 Hobgoblins. Some mandatory Infernal Guard. Yeah, I think it's a thing. Couple of Bolt Throwers, the Iron Demon, which is like the better steam tank. And then the real magic is the Hobgoblin Wolf Riders with a Khan with the Ruby Ring of Ruin, where he's using Fire and Flee, Feign Flight, and Evasive to basically make them untouchable, just running in and out of woods, fireballing you. This was a pretty tense game where the way that my army works, I need to be really tight with my positioning to not lose the game, because if you catch one unit, you overrun, then reform and get to catch the next unit and basically walk through my whole army.
Yeah.
And so the way that I have to play the army to not lose is to be pretty precise with movement and with positioning, and to also be quite bullish with making sure that the opponent's movement does the same thing, right?
Yeah, sure, I get you.
And so I think this was to be honest, probably a game where both of us were not in our best mood because we were both playing tight Warhammer, but not being as declarative as we needed to be about our intention with positioning stuff. And so we had quite a few moments where he'd positioned a bunch of units that he thought my dragon couldn't get a charge past his goblins, and I thought I could. And so things like that, where you had to really talk through it. He then had a bunch of really bad luck where like his level 4 charged into my tree man, did no damage, had 1 wound left, and then died. And where like his hobgoblin wolf riders charged two Sisters of the Thorn with a wolf rider character in them, did no wounds, took a wound back, fled, and were caught. So he had some pretty rough luck. I was pissing poisons out like they were going out of fashion. And so it was a bit tense. I think it was also quite late. Like the last game starts at 5 and runs 5:30, runs till 8.
Yeah, that's a long day if you've sort of had taken the train in. And
yeah, so it was. I had a really good long chat with Tom afterwards. I think he found it to be a pretty unpleasant game against me, and I also think I didn't handle it the best in that I wasn't being as declarative and tight with my stuff as I should have been. I think we really should have.
Like talk to me about that. Like you talk about being declarative, and I know what you mean, but can you sort of break that down? Because how does that avoid the issues that you faced in that game?
Sure. So when really good tournament players, and I would say Chris is the best person I've played against that does this, he will move something and he'll say, my intention is that I am in line of sight of this and within this distance. Do you agree? And then if you disagree at that point, you have a chat and position it so that it's right. If you're not declarative, what you do is you move your dragon in such a way that you think you're out of line of sight, and the opponent gets to their turn and says, I charge your dragon. And you say, no, I'm out of your line of sight. And then you have an argument about whether you're in or out of line of sight. So being declarative
and
is
it's too late to fix it at that point, isn't it?
Yeah, can't go back to moving it in a different way, even though you might have had loads of movement to do that. You then you have to get your lasers out. You get real intense. So a declarative way of playing is where it's both a generosity to your opponent in that you're being really clear with your intention in each way, where you say, I'm putting my dragon so that he's 1 millimeter into this wood. This means he can see out of it. But if you target him with any magic missiles, he's going to fall back in good order because of evasive and then reform in a way where you can't see him and your magic missiles will fail, for example. So you're really talking through not just what your movements are in terms of the exact distance, but the intended effect of that, so that when the thing happens, it's not a gotcha. And so because lots of my army is really playing with moving out of people's arc of sight, either by moving behind hills and forests, or when someone gets close to my Wood Elf army, which they often won't expect, you then march past their arc of sight rather than standing there and copying shots. Like the whole thing is just avoidance. That's really unpleasant when the opponent feels like they're doing the things that they should be able to do to catch you and you're not. And I also just think I was not being clear enough at that point in the game. So that caused tension, I think, with Tom, and I don't think he had a great time. Fair enough. And he called it after a few turns because it was just, he had pretty rough luck as well. And it was getting not heated, but like, yeah, not hugely fun, I would say. And actually, on the whole, I wasn't super happy with how I was playing the Wood Elves over the weekend, not in terms of them being good, but in terms of how tight and clear I was with my opponents about what I was doing, because I think it is a bit of a feels bad army, and there were things that I was getting rules wrong at points in the tournament that benefited me. Like I didn't realize until a few games in that Rob was running all forests as dangerous terrain. So when my Wood Elves move through, they take a dangerous terrain check. Now they get to re-roll that, so you need double ones to take damage, but I didn't realize that for my first few games. Things like that, where especially when you're playing a very competitive game, I was upset with not playing it as tight as I could have, considering that. But again, I hadn't practiced, so that's sort of what happens.
And for me, there's also like kind of a maybe a helpful lesson to take out of that, which is that Warhammer on the whole is super fun, but that doesn't mean that you're always going to have fun. And if a game is, for whatever reason, gets to the point where it's hot, you're tired, it's frustrating, and you're just not going to have fun slogging it out, that's not necessarily a failing on the person. This is more from Lord of the Rings, but there are a couple of events that I signed up to. I sort of felt like I could play them, so I probably should, but I just wasn't really feeling it, and ended up getting like kind of frustrated, and would have preferred I'd just actually taken the weekend off. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of like human psychology going on behind all of that.
Yeah, I had an event years back when I was living in Germany, and I'd signed up to an event in Germany, and it was a couple of hours out from where I was living, and I went up in the morning of, and I literally got to the end of game 2, and I just wasn't feeling the games, and that it had nothing to do with sort of my opponents. Part of it was just where I was. Like, I think I'd had a pretty busy week work-wise. It was obviously a higher effort for me to play in Germany with. While I speak German, I don't speak German Warhammer language particularly fluently. So it was a higher effort level, and so sometimes you're just not feeling it. And I remember going home after game 2, and I got home that evening. It was meant to be a two-day event, and my wife was like, "This is unheard of that I would come home for an event." So sometimes, yeah, you're just not feeling it. But what I like, I love how honest you are about that game, Dave, because I mean, every player who's played Warhammer for as long as we have will have had games where they probably weren't the best opponent for their the other for their opponent, and as we all have games where our opponent wasn't the best opponent for a game with us. So I think you've spoken about it very candidly, and the big thing I take out of it is you mentioned you had a big chat with your opponent after that game and sort of spoke about it. So did that sort of help sort of smooth things over and leave you both feeling better about it, or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and certainly, I don't certainly from my side, no bad blood, and we had a good long chat afterwards. I don't think it was like, I don't want to give the impression to people who haven't gone to tournaments that this is the normal game that you're going to have. This was top tables late in the day with 2 quite tough armies. I think we had a good chat afterwards. I think that did help. I think the thing I'm a bit annoyed with myself is when I've been playing tournaments before, it's been with an edition where I've really ground out more games with the army that I'm playing with. And so I really know all my stuff really well. Whereas I've basically only played Wood Elves at tournaments. And I think it is a bad feeling when your opponent's having to keep correcting things that you're doing. And they're right, that you're making incorrect rulings, incorrect readings of the rules. And so that, I think, was a good learning experience. And Tom was lovely about it afterwards, and we had a good chat. I don't think he had any particular hard feelings on it. I think he called it because he decided he was not going to win, and he was not having a good time with the rest of the game, and so would have rather not continue to play the last few terms to eke out a few more points rather than have that experience. So I think it's a fair call at that point as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly noticed something similar in that because I play less games than I used to, I inherently, like, playing Warhammer Fantasy, I pretty much knew all the rules instantly. They were just up in my head, and you could play on autopilot, and you could get through it, and so you'd get to the end of the day and things wouldn't be as tired because you kind of on autopilot through a lot of the previous games and stuff like that. And then when I played Age of Sigmar for a bit, the not knowing the rules as well and not being as practiced as a tournament player, I was finding myself in more of those situations where I was making mistakes with my own rules because I just couldn't contain, have all that information in my head. And it feels bad as a player to make those mistakes with your own rules, because at the absolute minimum, your responsibility should be to get your own stuff right. And coming from a background of playing games where I knew exactly what everything in my army did, but I also knew exactly what everything in my opponent's army did, because we just had played so many games so often to a point where I don't even know the full Old World rule set, let alone the full army rule set for my own army.
Yeah, especially the designers.
Especially the designers.
Yeah, and it's not just that the game is new, but it also hasn't had all of the kinks and ambiguities worked out yet. And so, like, some of the things that the Scots are playing, or the ways they're interpreting some of the rules, are different to the way that the Nottingham crowd are doing some things. And not that either is necessarily right or wrong. There's just two ways to go, and they've taken different ways. And until every FAQ has been asked and answered, that's going to continue to be the case. On the other hand, there are things like the movement value of Forsaken that really are pretty clear, and I still didn't actually know until like the fourth round of the event. Although on the plus side, I was playing them as less movement than they actually had.
Yeah. Not more.
Yeah.
All right, well, tell us about your slow ass Forsaken on day one.
All right, so I was finally unleashing my new army project, the Realtors of Chaos, upon the world. And this was my Warriors of Chaos army made out of mostly Stormcast and Age of Sigmar models. Because, as was made very clear by Games Workshop, we're not supposed to be using Age of Sigmar ranges in our tournament games. So I'm playing one of their official factions, the Warriors of Chaos, and using, none of the models were available to buy because they still haven't released yet. So made do with what I could.
You're so contrary.
Yeah, actually, maybe next time we do a hobby-focused episode, it could be fun to talk about conceptually, because whilst for everyone else, Old World is a nostalgia kick, this is an army that's made out of only new models using new paints and just products and models and techniques that just weren't part of the ecosystem back in the Warhammer Fantasy days. And so, an interesting, different way to go, perhaps.
And looks amazing. It's such a cleanly painted and converted army, Chris. Like, it's so beautiful. The standard you got on that thing in like a month and some change is pretty unbelievable.
Well, except that Dave managed to almost torpedo that, because I'd had a very settled list for a while, and then Dave's slithy tongue reached my ears, started talking to me about dragons, and so I changed the list like a week out, and had to buy, build, and paint a dragon. So not the Warriors.
Had to. You were forced to. Yeah,
absolutely had to. Not that it was the Warriors of Chaos dragon that you might be used to. I had a Sorcerer Lord of Tzeentch riding a dragon, a Demon Prince who was also a level 4 as the characters, and then 2 blocks of Forsaken, 3 units of Warhounds, 3 individual Dragon Ogre champions, and a unit of Chosen Chaos Knights. So it looks like it's a combat army. There's Forsaken, there's Knights, there's Dragon Ogres, there's a dragon. But the secret is it's actually a Wood Elf army. And I was just having a bucket load of magic missiles and pillars of fire, and kind of doing what Dave's army did, dancing around and avoiding people while shooting them. But unfortunately, warriors don't do that quite naturally as well as Wood Elves, and give up quite a few more points in the process. So I did have to fight maybe a few more combats over the course of the event.
So you've got Dave's magic phase, but then instead of having a bunch of ballistic skill-based shooting to back it up, you've got some middling combat stuff.
Sort of. I think I think in a way my shooting is better because magic missile. Dave's got more pillars of fire, but magic missiles are so much better than ballistic skill shooting that I would feel confident in outshooting at least a lot of the shooting armies that you get in the game.
The other big thing though is that in a shooting for a shooting army, Chris's army is really tough, whereas almost the entirety of my army is toughness 3 stuff with no save, and
sure.
Yep. If Chris's army doesn't probably have as raw, pure output with all the pillars of fire bouncing through stuff, but if it gets punched back, it's not just going to cave over in the same way.
So in game 1, I got paired against Toby's Orcs and Goblins. Toby ended up winning coolest army, and also before the game, Rob said he's one of the best opponents to have, and I can absolutely vouch for that. Toby had an army that had loads of spider conversions throughout, although it did only have one actual spider. So there were lots of things that were using spider models. There was a troll hag, a super converted wyvern, but the only actual spider was a level 4 goblin shaman riding an Arachnarok spider. a couple of big blocks of goblins with fanatics, a couple of doom divers. So most, apart from the troll hag and the spider, had all of the things you'd want from a sort of stock orc list. But then the troll hag was a different kind of spider model. Had the spider banner on his night goblins. Came together really nicely. And this was one of the first games where I realized that opponents might get baited into thinking I was going to try to fight them in combat, where the wyvern came up alongside the troll hag and sort of postured it in front of my demon prince and my dragon. And the demon prince and the dragon spat out a bunch of magic missiles and moved backwards. And then the wyvern came closer and I moved sideways and spat out some more magic missiles. And then when the wyvern got sick of that and sat right in front of me, I went past it and shot more magic missiles. Eventually dragged down the troll hag. Meanwhile, the chosen knights had kind of gone around the back to clear out the doom divers. And the Forsaken really good at just blending night goblins.
Turns out.
Yeah. And I think Toby and I probably made... Toby used his fanatics extremely well, using like just enough of them to be a problem whilst keeping... not deploying them all at once, so keeping one or two back to threaten things later in the game. And we probably made a mistake each. Not to say we played it perfectly. Toby, I think, it was expecting or committing his wyvern to receive a charge that I didn't actually want to declare. And so I was able to get a little bit of extra time out of my magic missiling, perhaps. This was supplemented by having double arcane urgency. So I was able to go like move backwards, lumbering reposition, arcane urgency forwards, reposition, second arcane urgency, reposition again, kind of dancing around a building with this dragon that normally can only really go forwards. And then my mistake was with the chosen knights. Once they'd finished clearing up some backline, I put them into the Arachnoric Spider to try and pin it in place, and massively underestimated what that thing could do. The Chosen Knights got bopped, and the game ended up being super tight. I'd managed to take out the Troll Hag and the Night Goblins, but I'd lost quite a few points in the process, including the Chosen Knights. But I ended up sneaking it in 11-9, which, as we were saying before, win big, win small, a win's a win. And so... that sort of 150 odd points I ended up ahead by got me into the winners bracket for the second game.
Yeah, so you're in the winners bracket and you don't have to play people like Dave who have just smacked their opponent 18-2 in round one.
Yep, and my plan of winning games by the skin of my teeth was kind of set to continue. I got Richie Amphlett in the second game, who's been on the Close Order podcast. Won, I think, at least one of Rob's events, and has a really cool dwarf army. He was using the new Dwarf Arcane Journal, and less shooting than normal, which I think he came to regret over the course of the event. But we were playing Battle for the Pass, which is normally the sort of dwarven special. However, I had a secret weapon here, which was Chosen Knights in drill formation and Arcane Urgency. So Richie deploys... sets up a really solid defensive deployment around a hill. And I have my Chosen Knights in marching column. I think I win first turn, go 21 inches forward, cast Arcane Urgency, go another 21 inches forward, and can then charge out of drilled formation into the War Machines on turn 2. And that I'm able to cast those
spells, motherfucker.
Oh yeah.
42 inches in one turn is so wild.
I mean, I failed to cast the other one, or it might have been 63. But like the other thing you can do, because it's early doors, is you can cast those spells from outside of dispel range.
Yeah.
Especially when your opponent's dispel option is an anvil. So there's not a lot that Richie can do to prevent that from happening.
Yeah.
And the game then devolved into me trying to slog my way through the shooting units, and Richie trying to bring his big block of warriors with characters around to try and clean up some points in response. I got pretty lucky with various roles, especially with Dragon Ogre Shartax. Those things are absurd for the points.
So good.
Yeah, I think one of them killed like the mining cart and a Thane. The other one killed a runesmith and several of the Iron Drakes. My Demon Prince managed to fail like 3 attempts to charge the Rune Lord on the anvil, which, as it turns out, might have been for the best because that thing's actually really tough. Basically, the game was kind of decided in a way by that turn 1 Fang forward with the Knights. I was able to pick up more points than Richie was able to get out of my chaff with his big block. Although he did end up setting up, I wasn't quite sure what. He'd declared a charge into a Dragon Ogre, and because it's old world, you can do all sorts of things after that with overruns and repositions. They also had drilled, so the worry was that he would go super wide with the overrun or the charge afterwards and clip the dragon. And I wasn't quite sure what he had in mind, so I sat a Demon Prince right next to the unit so that they wouldn't be able to drilled reform super wide, which ended up being just enough to protect the dragon from getting clapped by a giant brick of dwarves with all of the static res. And that was able to keep me ahead for a 13-7, whereas if he'd been able to get into that dragon, I think it potentially swings back to a draw. So another small win. And again, just leveraging magic. I did fight combat with my dragon this time. It charged 2 Iron Drakes to finish off the unit.
A novel approach, Chris.
Yeah. And actually didn't do as much shooting damage because the Demon Prince was trying to fight combat instead and then kept failing its charges. But yeah, blessing in disguise because the Rune Lord might have just beaten the Demon Prince itself. Again, fantastic opponent, and probably the biggest shout out I'd have for my favorite thing about the game against Richie was the amount of trash talk we had. It's one of my favorite aspects of the game, but with people you haven't played or you don't know super well before, you can't always lean as far into it as I find really fun. So I know Dave and I were talking a lot about how we were going to defeat and destroy each other. That's based on a long history of similar banter. But yeah, game against Richie had a load of that from the start, and it was super fun. The kind of good-natured trash talk that I really love in a game of Warhammer.
Nice.
And go on.
I was also going to say, just Richie's army is amazing. If you've not seen any pictures of it, it's been on a few of Rob's shows, I'm pretty sure, and lots of like object source sliding. Alpine dwarves, just incredible, really nice.
And I know Rob says this a lot about his events, but the standard of hobby as a whole is super high. There were too many nice armies to choose from for the players' choice voting, and I even missed like a couple of the nicest ones. Apparently, they were just behind some of the screens for the streaming tables, and I just didn't even see armies that were super nice. So, massive shout out to everyone involved.
Yeah, really good.
And then in the last round, on 2 wins, I was playing against Ogres, which, tournament powerhouse, the Ogre Kingdoms. And
I love this army. This army is really cool.
Yeah. So this was against Jack, who had a really interesting build of Ogres. And at first glance, it looks like what you might expect. There's a Tyrant on a Stonehorn, an Iron Gut unit with a Slaughtermaster. But then there's kind of nothing else. There's a Gutstar and a Stonehorn that deploys, and then everything else is scouting the Sabertusks, the Eddies, the Gorges.
I've heard about this list.
Then he's going for the +1 for the first turn roll. He's got Steed of Shadows on his Illusion Slaughtermaster, which I don't normally like Illusion, but here it fits super well. Giving the Stonehorn fly and move 12 makes it way more mobile. So he was able to just put it 24 inches up the table on turn 1. Shimmering Dragon for whatever the -1 to hit spell is on the Iron Guts.
Glittering Robe.
24 is still a lot less than 42.
Yeah, that's true. You need 2 level 4s to start doing that. And Illusion on a Slaughtermaster, which has some decent combat stats for Doppelganger, is also pretty nice. So I don't normally love Illusion, but Jack had found a really good way to make it work in a list that really appreciated pretty much all of the things it was doing, because then he's making all of the spells work that aren't Crystal Column and the Miasma that stops you from charging. So he's got the good spells, but he's making good value out of all the others too. And this was a game of me avoiding running away and chaffing things up, because whilst the tyrant can fly in the remaining moves phase, it can't fly as a charge. So I was able to put dogs and dragon ogres in front of it, and just threw 4 magic missiles and 2 pillars of fire at the tyrant every turn for like 4 turns, and just rolled pretty well. I was rolling a 6 or 2 every magic missile that hit it, and just chipped away at the tyrant on the Stonehorn over several turns. And once it dropped, I was able to basically switch to chaffing up the Gutstar, who in turn were dropping crystal columns and miasmas on my units to stop me from gang charging it. And that ended up being most of how the game sort of played out. Was I picked up the big points from the tyrant, I lost my chaff, I took out Jack's chaff, and right in the last turn, I had the option of going into the Gutstar with the Chosen Knights and my Dragon and my Demon Prince, because he'd miasmed the Forsaken that I'd been hoping would also get to go in. And so I think with everything going in, I'm pretty confident. But with Miasma off, with Glittering Robe off, and the risk would have been a win turning into a loss if things went really badly, ended up taking the Cowards option and sitting back. But another really interesting game with loads of positioning, and Jack's list design I thought was really clever. I know he's got some changes he wants to make. He didn't like the Gorges all that much, but just a really clever way to put it together.
And for context, that Iron Gut unit has about 900 points in it. It has Magic Res 2, it's -1 to hit, it has 5 up regen, it rerolls 1s to hit. It is everything to all people. It's veteran, so it rerolls leadership tests. It's like
the opposite form of points denial to what you're doing, right? You've got lots of tiny units that aren't worth jack shit. And this is, so you can't get the points because you've got to spend the whole game chasing all these little units. Whereas this is, all of the points are in one big unit, so you can't get the points.
Exactly right. You can spend 3 turns killing 165-point unit of archers, or you can try and get his 1,000-point unit, or his chaff and his Stonehorn. It's I like this list for ogres. I think this is close to the direction I'd be going.
So you're both on 3 wins at the end of the day. It's different styles. Chris is pretty cagey. He's got 3 small wins. You've just blattered 3 poor people.
Yeah,
Dave. So
we're the only people on 3 wins at this point as well.
Yep. There'd been a draw on the other table of undefeated players, I think. So we knew we would be playing the following day.
Oh, so you had the whole night to talk shit.
But I think we didn't actually do as much of that as we might have, because there was a big group going to dinner at a really nice sort of Asian fusion, or like mixed Asian dishes place that I think every tournament they go to. Had some lovely dinner there. Great
dinner. Lots of time to talk about other things, but we also had the hour train ride home and then the hour train ride back the next morning to theory game the game out 3 or 4 times.
Played your game on the train and rolled in a bit late.
Yeah, well,
I think it was somewhere in that conversation that we discovered Forsaken have movement 5 and not 4. My mind just blew up a little bit when Dave mentioned it.
Hey, the difference between 5 inches and 4 inches is very important.
Sometimes it's that extra inch that's all that counts.
Yeah, but if you're doing enough other stuff around it, then 1 inch more or less doesn't necessarily make all the difference.
Sure.
Well, it didn't seem to make a difference for you on day 1.
So
did the extra inch come in handy in game 4?
Our game? I mean, honestly, I think this is one of the best games I've played of Warhammer full stop. So I don't think everyone, like you said at the start, Chris, would think this, because the game was our 2 armies inching around each other, using magic missiles and shooting to carve off small points.
Those are the best games.
Trying to get some optimized charges with the dragon, which Chris was not offering to me, and Chris nicking off points mostly with magic missiles on my army. And so Chris sat his incredibly expensive Chosen Knights in the corner behind a building for the whole game, basically. And because he didn't want my dragon to take them off the table, which he was going to do. And then he ran all his chaff at me pretty aggressively, which is pretty scary. And then we found out, can Chaos outshoot Wood Elves, Chris?
Oh, easily.
Yeah.
The magic missiles were able to pick up, and this is over 6 turns. Like it takes a lot of time to pick up actual victory points with the magic missile spam, but able to take out an eagle, a unit of scouts, most of a unit of archers, a couple of units of sisters, I think, which if you're not giving up points in return is a lot.
If you've got an army of like toughness 3, no armor, infantry and cavalry, like you don't want to see magic missiles across the other side of the board, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, you should absolutely don't.
So, what was your plan going into it then, Dave? Because obviously Chris's plan, you've sort of ventilated it. Is he sort of jammed you up with the chaff, and he's trying to nick away points every turn with the magic missiles. Like, what did you look at going into this? How do you approach it?
I would like to catch his Demon Prince or his dragon with my dragon. I didn't think Chris was going to give me that opportunity because Chris is a very tight player. He had a lot of stuff that I can get points off. Dragon Ogres are 70 points each. The Forsaken are about 200 points for each of the units. And so he's getting stuff off me quicker. But when I get stuff, it's worth more than the things he's getting off me, basically. And so my plan on this was take points when I can, and then just literally hide behind forests and impassable terrain elsewise to not give him as many targets as I could, and hopefully bully him so that he doesn't get to use all his magic with my dragon. That the dragon probably doesn't catch his dragon, but what it probably does is hopefully stop him from casting as much, which kind of worked. I think Chris totally shut my dragon out. I don't think he did much in the game.
Well, critically, because the Forsaken have Impetuous, Dave took advantage of this, and then Mikhail in the last game did it even more. I think, if I remember correctly, Dave has just gone and sat his dragon in front of a unit of Forsaken and just gets to pick up those points.
Yeah.
I'd push them forward a bit to sort of threaten some space, and I think that was definitely a mistake because the dragon could both guard the backline and bait the Forsaken charge at the same time. Whereas
so you're saying the extra inch was actually too much.
Too much.
Whereas what I could have done, and maybe with hindsight would have actually been wiser, is to just have had them on the backline and just said, "You're not getting these points without fully committing to my side of the board," because those 200 points that Dave gets out of that Forsaken unit end up being pretty critical in a tight game.
Yeah.
So I had a real long thought about whether I go for shooting his Sorcerer on a Dragon. His Sorcerer on a Dragon only has a 4-up, 5-up. Is that right, Chris?
Mm-hmm.
And 9 wounds. So I could do it with 50 poison shots and a bunch of work from maybe getting off the Plague of Rust spell. The other thing I thought playing Chris's army is he actually doesn't really want to charge my stuff with his dragon because the damage output is not as good as what he's getting off with his spells. Like he kills more than one unit a turn basically with his spells.
So he's killing stuff slower in combat than if he's just floating around blasting.
Yeah. So I thought about going for the dragon. I'm still not sure if that was. I mean, I won in the end, but it was incredibly close. And I think maybe it was a better idea to go for his dragon because he would have had to probably turn the dragon around at some point. The challenge then is that his Forsaken and the 3 Shataks are going to get in at some point, and they are more than capable of clearing up points. Like in the game, 2 Forsaken got into my lines, and I got incredibly lucky to kill them because like anything that gets into the Wood Elves, you just lose points really fast.
Yeah, I think if you'd shot the dragon, that would have probably been better for me, I think, because I wasn't giving you the whole of your army shooting into it at any point. No. So it wasn't as though you'd be able to try and drop it in a turn. You'd have to commit to doing it over a few turns. and something we haven't mentioned, we were playing the terrain in the middle
control
of the board scenario, and so I was kind of hovering around this hill in the middle of the board, specifically with the thought in mind that if Dave does chip a few wounds off the dragon, I can then bunker down behind here and be really conservative with what I offer him from that point on. So
and
trying to bait you into wasting a turn or two shooting into the dragon to then leave the other stuff alive long enough to make contact.
And Rob plays the central, the hill, if it's the hill in the middle of the board, as impassable line of sight blocking terrain. So you can dance around it to avoid combat, which is what Chris's dragon was doing to avoid my dragon, basically. Chris, do you want to tell us how the end of the game? Because we calculated the points as we kind of went along, and we got to the final 2 turns, and it was like on a razor's edge. I was ahead marginally from having killed all of Chris's chaff, and I had been able to hide remaining like 1 or 2 sisters, wood elves behind forests that Chris wasn't able to get. How did the game finish up?
So we talked a lot about the dragons, but I think the way the game ended up actually getting decided was on the opposite flank, where 2 units of sisters popped out, dropped a couple of pillars of fire, and then ran away. And I wasn't able to do enough to those sisters with my magic in response to take them out. And so those pillars bounced around, ended up taking out the second block of Forsaken. And I think this happened in part because of a list building error on my part. I didn't have a lore familiar on the Demon Prince, and so I'd missed 1 pillar of fire and 1 fireball. I think each of the wizards had only had 2 damage spells instead of the potential 3, and so there's like 3 sisters left that still have a pillar of fire up, and then I charge them with a dragon ogre, which they then like beat in combat, and then those like small number of points, 200 for the Forsaken, potentially a unit of sisters, the dragon ogre, end up being points I'm just never able to claw back over the rest of the game. And so we get to the final turn, and look at the points. I've got second turn, so I don't have to worry about Dave's response. And Dave's ahead by about 200 and something points, 200 and change. And I'm trying to bring it back to either a draw or a win. I get a draw if I kill 3 units with my magic missiles, and I get a win if I charge his dragon with my Demon Prince and break it in combat, which is super unlikely. So I go for the magic missile plan, kill a unit of scouts and an eagle, but don't get the sisters. And so Dave ends up being ahead by whatever it is, 150 odd points, enough for the 11-9 win, and the undefeated run, the reign of terror of the Wood Elves, gets to continue.
Yes,
like
really
close.
I
love playing games like that where you're tracking how close it is throughout the game, and that's something we did a lot when we played the ETC, was tracking your victory points differential every single turn, so you always know what the state of the game is, and going, well, I could just kill that unit, then I'm back in with a draw. And those super technical movement phase based games, like there's some of they can be hard work. And sometimes it's fun to just ram your toys into each other. But yeah, those super cerebral games are some of the best games of Warhammer.
So I think Old World works really well for fun games. A lot of dynamic stuff happens and it can be really swingy. But this was the game that probably convinced me more than anything that you can also have super crunchy, really precise, tight games of Warhammer like we used to really enjoy back in the 7th ed, 8th ed days. And I might have been a bit skeptical about whether Old World could deliver that, but this event in general and this game in particular really hammered that home to me. Like you can play the game in have the same approach that we used to really enjoy from the game, but perhaps more than other editions, it also suits really fun dynamic games really well as well.
Yeah, nice. All right, well, Chris, how did you close out the event then?
So I got to play against Mikhail, who Dave played in round 1. So he got to bookend his event with some dwellers. And I also played an avoidance shooting list with a dragon. And Mikhail, more than any of my other opponents, I think, Dave included, exploited the Forsaken and their impetuosity. So Dave did that with 1 unit, but Mikhail did that with 2. He's just deployed his dragon opposite Forsaken, 20 inches forward, come at me. and
Free
then
unit.
goes and does that to the second unit of Forsaken as well.
It's so much worse than a free unit, because what happens is you charge the dragon kills your whole unit, it gets
You
to overrun.
gets an overrun and a reform.
Yeah.
Because of that ridiculous FAQ.
3d6 inches of movement, and then getting to turn around, and it's so.
And it's doing
bad.
that reform. It's doing that reform in your turn.
That's
which
right.
means
After you've
it
moved.
then immediately gets to activate. And
it's not quite as bad as that, because with the ward save and stubborn, the Forsaken don't die in a round unless something spectacularly bad happens. But they're not able to, half of the time, they're not able to move past the dragon or force it to spend another turn declaring a charge. And because you charge the dragon, it gets to kill them sort of, like half a turn faster than you'd normally, than it would if they didn't have to charge. And so Mikhail was able to really exploit that, took out both units of Forsaken reasonably well, very efficiently. Meanwhile, I was flapping around with a dragon and a demon prince, doing my level best to not fight combat and kill everything with magic missiles. I managed to win the sort of chaff battle on the right flank, and I say chaff, this included my chosen knights, which, apart from the game against Richie, had a pretty quiet event. And so between picking up some points on the side and just hammering Swordmasters and Lothan Seaguard with magic missiles and pillars of fire, I was able to basically grind out a very close but narrow win, where again I had the sort of option of trying to take out the dragon for a big either the dragon or the second Swordmaster block in the last turn, and again took the coward's option and said, I'm not risking my dragon in combat. Yeah. This is an artillery piece, and kept flapping around and flying. Although my Demon Prince did finally fight its second round of combat in this game, with one round of combat against the Sea Guard. So across the event, my Demon Prince fought twice, and my dragon fought 3 times
in 5 games.
Combat warriors. So that was another narrow win. So my results were 11, 11, 12, 13, and 14, I think, across the 5 games. So all super tight games, absolute bucket of fun. And for me, it was everything I would want from a competitive tournament game, or a competitive tournament where everyone was, as much as we can be given the rule set, on top of the rules, knew what we were about, and had the same kind of mindset. Everyone was taking strong lists and trying to outplay their opponent, and just had a super fun time on the table.
Yeah, nice. So proportionally, what proportion of the points, like victory points, you got over the weekend was from Magic versus combat?
The vast majority. Outside of the game against Richie, where I did pick up most of the points with the unit of Chosen Knights combating through the backline, I think every other game I got more than half my points with Magic, and less than half with combat.
And that's where it's good to have that sort of backup plan, right? Because you clearly a magic missile-oriented army, but against a dwarf army with larger blocks with war machines, you're not going to be able to win a game purely on. You're not going to be able to kill nearly as much stuff.
And I think
with your primary game plan, so right, having that plan B of, well, I can just fang these knights into someone if I really need to.
Yeah. And I think Dave and I both got to exploit what's always been the best thing for dragons, which is dragon plus gunline. You force people to overextend into you, and then you get to pick your combats. Whereas if you just have an aggressive army with a dragon, then you're charging into other people's defensive formations, which is a lot harder to do.
Yeah, it's just a much stronger build. The lists that can shoot and have flying gribblies than the ones that are just pushing a
because you dictate different elements of the game, and your opponent has to choose between playing defensively and just getting shot at all game, or as you said, overextending. So Dave,
and people decide not to go into you. They see your dragon and they go, "Oh, I'm not going to move forward," and then it's like, "Great, I'm just going to shoot you off the table."
Going to shoot you.
Fun times.
That's right. Dave, you 4-0. You've dispatched Mr. the Egg. Did you close it out?
Yes, I did. So I came up against Rob Nixon running Chaos. Again, a pretty great list with a fully tricked out Dragon Lord with an Ogre Blade, so I want nothing to do with that.
No,
Uninterested in being involved in that situation. Sorcerer Lord and a Chariot with Infernal Puppet and Demonology, which makes you roll 3 dice for your magic and choose the lowest 2. Really powerful defensive magic ability. Chaos Knights, 3 units of Forsaken with Slanesh, they move fast. 2 units of 3 Spawn with Khorne, which I really like. They get Killing Blow, and they're just toughness 5 and pretty hard to get rid of. But his army basically plays like fast-moving chaff, a dragon. That's the game. I let his dragon go kill some 65-point units of archers, and then I took everything else off with shooting and magic.
Yeah, and so that's like the difference with Chris's list, where it's, again, we talk about that plan A versus plan B. Like that list only has one plan, which is it's fast, it's gribbly, it's got a big dragon lord that wants to kill a lot of stuff, and so it doesn't have that option of just dancing around and playing a really cagey game like you guys did. It has to just go forward.
Has to go forward. That's right. And at the end of the day, my dragon is going to get to eat units that are all worth about 100 points, and I'm not going to give his dragon an option to charge Sisters of the Thorn because they're fast cavalry that are really quick. So what's he going to get? He's going to get 65-point units of archers.
So even though his dragon is monumentally more scary, it's going to be 35% less, efficient than yours is. I assume you obviously have to just make sure your dragon doesn't touch his dragon because it'll disappear into a fine mist.
Yeah.
But if you can wrangle that you take a unit, I take a unit, you take a unit, I take a unit, you're going to be getting more points.
Basically, yeah. So my dragon doesn't want to be involved with his dragon. His dragon does beat me with the Ogre Blade. But my dragon is way cheaper than his dragon is. And is, yes, 100 points cheaper, but also has Annoyance of Netlings and Befuddlement of Mischief. So he hits me on 5s. So he doesn't probably drop me in one go if it does come to that. I don't beat him back is the downside. I do no damage to him. He's too tough. So, but the challenge then is like, how does his dragon pick up enough points to equal what my dragon's getting off him, plus all the pillars of fire and shooting? And there's just no really conceivable way that it can. Even with my bigger points units like the Treeman Ancient, you put the Treeman Ancient on the edge of the forest, the dragon spends 2 turns moving up to charge you. You step right out of the forest. It walks up and touches the forest. You go, great, I'm marching out of your arc of sight forward because you have to now be within 5 inches of me, and so you can't see you later. You can't see me again. Spend another turn reforming, and then you can charge me. That's 5 turns. That's the game done, and you've not caught my Treeman Ancient. So it was a bad matchup for Rob. Got a 15-5 against him. Rob had smashed 2 of his opponents, 20 zip and another 15-5. So he'd done big wins.
Yeah, I mean that list is going to just, if it can get into stuff, is just going to absolutely wreck it. Right.
That list against my Ogre's army just kills everything. It just takes off everything. You put your dragon into my Stonehorn or into my Gutstar, and everything dies, and it gets 1,000 points and calls it a day. Yeah, so it's a pretty great list, I think, on the whole. But the Wood Elves counter. So pulled out the win. It was the only army. I was the only one who got 5 wins out of 5. So got the victory and pretty happy with that. And yeah, enjoyed playing the Wood Elves.
And Chris, where did you finish up?
Third in the end. I was on 4-1. I think one of 2 players, but the victory points. I'd had all close games, no big blowouts, which meant that my total tiebreakers weren't super high, which was
sure. So I assume that was then Dave's opponent in the last round who came second.
No, it was Dave's opponent the day before.
Because he wouldn't have been 4-0 coming against you because you guys were the only 4-0s. You only had 1 4-0. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And between that and the players who had gotten a draw in round 3 and so were undefeated, both lost the following round. So there was Dave was just super far clear. And it meant that the positions further back got super muddled because there's lots of draws and lots of people on 3 wins, but not many spiking out in front of the pack.
Yeah, because it's not going to be a clean cut like you would get in a Magic event or something where it's a win-loss. It's win-loss draw. That adds that third element. It can muddy things up, right? Yeah, okay.
And that meant going into round 5, I knew all I had to do was like not get tabled. It was basically impossible for me to lose the event at that point.
Yeah. Good feeling to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it was an awesome weekend. I'm very jealous. I wanted to there was a few things I wanted to talk hobby stuff. I wanted to talk about the social aspect, but we've probably droned on a little bit longer than we'd planned. Just give me your top 1 or 2 absolute highlights from the weekend. Dave.
I would say absolute highlight for the weekend was going out to dinner with people afterwards at the GB Cafe. That was great. The post day 1 meal, really lovely. Great to meet everyone and play there. But the other massive highlight, it's not a specific game. It's just the level of hobby and tables. I remember when we first set up to have our first tournament, we really wanted it to be beautiful tables, nice armies themed. Rob's just delivering this to a level that we didn't get to. And going to a tournament where everyone's armies are amazing. There's all these great conversions, 3D prints, interesting lists to play against. The tables looked amazing. It was just so immersive, so beautiful to see that on the table and filled me with a tremendous amount of joy.
I will not say the dinner in the evening, although that was really good. I'm going to say the lunches on both days. Rob pointed us in the direction of a really nice, pretentious beer cafe with some food trucks out the back, and maybe half the tournament both days went there, as well as Ed from Close Order dropped by as well to say hi. And so you ended up getting the sort of same vibe as the evening meal, but 2 extra versions. But these ones were in the sun, very chill. A highlight that I wasn't really expecting. I very much appreciated that. And then, on the table, I would say my sneaky highlight, as I said, was the trash talk and the level of precision. Really reminded me of what I loved about Tournament Warhammer from back in the day. So, great social side of things, and on the table, it hit everything I wanted from my wargaming. So I'm super jazzed about the old world again in a way that I wasn't necessarily expecting.
Yeah, I mean, just listening to you guys talk about it has me super jazzed, and I'm lucky enough that there's a 1-day tournament coming up in October that I've got my eye on. So if anyone's in Melbourne, I think General Games Churnside Park are putting on a 1-day on the 19th, so I've got to plug that. And I should probably put myself down as interested. But yeah, it's just a little 3-game 1-dayer. Nice. I'm definitely keen to get some models ready for that. I'm not sure what I'll play. Maybe my Beasts, maybe my Tomb Kings. Kind of fancy doing a chariot army. Don't know if it's any good, but I have many chariots.
I think it's all right for Beastmen.
Oh yeah. Beastman chariots pretty good.
Something that I've recently started trying is that if you put a wizard on a chariot, it can shoot magic missiles in any direction.
Yes.
Oh boy, is that my new favorite thing.
I'm sensing a recurring theme of you and magic missiles here, Chris.
I can confidently
say
that's not going away anytime soon.
Every list he posts in the chat is just a new twist on a theme.
Yeah, the demon army is just going to be Furies and magic missiles.
Love it. Love that. I have most of that army just sitting in a box. I have many Furies.
I have spent the last 2 days on Etsy looking for Fury alternative sculpts, and I get paid tomorrow, so you'll be hearing much more about 40 Furies as core choices.
Chris's third old world army for the year.
Yeah, that's right.
I have a problem.
And yeah, the other thing I have on my list to plug is that obviously Rob from Square Bass does a great show, but he did an interview with Dave after the event. So
sweaty looking Dave in a Cannibal Corpse shirt, yeah.
Yeah, I'll chuck a link to that in the description if I remember tomorrow. But I have it in brackets on my little run sheet that Dave didn't plug the Dwellers during that interview, so not happy with that.
Here
we are giving Square Bass all the love, and
I feel like Val's giving us plenty of love.
They're the big dog, man. They're the big dog. You gotta get that plug in.
you know when you can't compete, Nick. You just got to realise that's it's not on the cards for us.
We're just
we're not hashtag sponsored.
The underground, the old world underground podcasting scene.
Yeah, the dishonest wargamers.
We could be like rogue, the rogue dwellers,
renegades.
the legacy podcast.
All right, guys. Anything else you want to say from that weekend?
Nah, just look. Can't wait to get out and play some more Warhammer. Probably without Woodell's the next event.
It's been good. Just an old-fashioned sort of tournament recap. I haven't done one of them in so long. Even just chatting to someone about an event. Oh, I'm so keen. Which is funny because the counterpoint, right? Like our last episode was us just being negative Nancy's for the whole thing about the 6 months of trash from Games Workshop, and here we are, like, yes, more Warhammer.
You were pretty bummed out last time, Nick. Yeah,
I was. I just haven't played in so long, and like I haven't even interacted with hobby at all. So, like, I'm now very keen. And there's like the light at the end of the tunnel is like soccer season's over, and I've kind of got a little bit more weekend freedom now. There's an event coming up. It's like, hey, maybe I will play some games this year.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear about your sweaty exploits.
Oh, it's gonna be so sweaty.
I think there's always been a thing as well. The more we focus on what Games Workshop is doing, the more easily negative we can be. Yeah, but the more we focus on what the community is doing and what's happening in the hobby around us, the more hyped we get. So I guess that's a good lesson for the future is GW will do what they do, and we're going to have a whole bunch of fun doing whatever else the community gets up to.
That might be an accurate synopsis for like every episode of this podcast ever. Workshop bad, community good, Warhammer good.
Community the best.
All right, well, we've been the Dwellers Below. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time. Don't fail your strength test.